All right, welcome back to another theme of the month video with Coach Busy. This month is March, as you know, and the theme is be your own best teammate. So before we get going, I kind of want to just recap what we've learned so far from January and February. January was championship mindset month. So I wanted to introduce sort of what mental skills are and which mental skills we can use to become elite volleyball players, kind of get us thinking about the mental side of the game. In February, we switched gears to building on those mental skills and using imagery to start building up our confidence in practice that translates to games. As I said, this month is being our own best teammate. And the way that we are going to think about that is using self talk. Self talk is something that maybe you've heard of before. Maybe you haven't, but I guarantee you that you have used it before. It's basically what we say to ourselves throughout the day. Self talk can be stuff that you can say to yourself in school if you're taking a test, trying to remember what you studied, and the things you're saying to yourself. It could be at home, um, just kind of talking to yourself about your day. And certainly, athletes use self talk at practices and games and in performances. And I think that breaking it down into what self talk should look like to be helpful to ourselves is very important. So I like to break it down into these sort of four categories. Self talk can either be positive or negative. So a positive self talk will be something like, hey, you got this. Negative would be sort of the opposite of, you're playing so poorly today or something like that. Realistic self-talk is telling ourselves things that are true. Like if you miss a pass, or if you miss a pass and serve receive and you say to yourself, hey, you're a good passer, you got the next one. That's realistic. And unrealistic self-talk will be something like, hey, you don't know what you're doing, you're bad at volleyball, something like that. Self-talk should also be really simple. So short sort of phrases or sentences. And I like to stay away from complicated self-talk where we're spending a lot of time in the moment, certainly recapping what's going on in complicated long ways. We just, as athletes, don't really have time for it. And if we're playing, maybe afterwards. And I think really important to keep our self talk specific. So I think sometimes athletes say to yourselves like, "You got this, you got it," stuff like that, and that can be really helpful. If it's helpful for you, then continue to do it. But I like to make self talk a little bit more specific. So if it's you struggling with hitting, instead of saying you got this, you can say something like high hand, hit hard, you're strong, you got the next hit, something a little more specific. So that's kind of the background on self talk. And I think going into the next slide, I think it's important to think about, is our self talk actually helpful? Are we saying things to ourselves that are helpful? So, like I said, self talk should be positive, realistic, simple, and specific. And a way to think about, is our self talk helpful, is imagining saying the things we say to ourselves, but saying it to a teammate instead. And I think it's really important as volleyball players that we think of ourselves as our own teammate, because when you're on the court or even on the bench or at practice, you are part of the team. So you have to treat yourself the way that you would treat a teammate in terms of how you motivate yourself, in terms of, and certainly in terms of the things you say to yourself. So if you're saying things to yourself in a game that's really supportive and honest and real, like, hey, it was just one bad pass, you got the next one, shoulders down, feet to the ball, something like that, that is a great thing to say to a teammate. Um, you got the next pass, you're a great passer, don't worry about it. That's really good talk. If you're saying things to yourselves that certainly you would never say to your teammate, that is harmful self-talk. And I think that kind of looks like, if you're kind of in a rut and you're thinking, oh, I'm playing so poorly today, I'm so bad, I can't believe it, I don't belong here, you would, I would bet none of you would ever turn around and say that to a teammate. So I think it's really important to start evaluating our self-talk in the way that we would talk to a teammate or even a really good friend when they're kind of struggling. So our self-talk should be all those things: positive, realistic, simple, and specific. And I think the way you can start breaking it down is the things I say to myself during games. Am I being supportive to myself? Am I being honest and real? And am I keeping it simple and specific? I think those are really important things to sort of consider. Self-talk in action. Where do we have self-talk in volleyball? Volleyball is a really great sport in that when you're playing, there's not a lot of time for thinking. So I want to break it down in terms of what we say to ourselves and kind of moments of pause. So, what are you saying to yourself maybe in between plays? Maybe if you're in serve receive and it's before the server is serving, or maybe you're about to serve, or maybe you're on the bench. It's kind of hard to break down our self talk while we're going. It's just too much of a fast paced game while the ball is in the air and we have other stuff to focus on. I want our self talk to kind of be in action in terms of moments of pause in volleyball. And I think one way to start reflecting on what we're saying to ourselves is thinking about maybe after practice when you're at home. Hey, what was I saying to myself in that drill that I was really struggling with? Was I being supportive to myself, or was I not being supportive and I could have been more supportive to myself? Breaking it down after the fact, and maybe not during practice, but after, and then kind of merging it into practice is something that I think can be really helpful. So again, thinking about what we're saying to ourselves in these moments that are kind of moments of pause in volleyball that can be really helpful to start talking to ourselves in really supportive ways. So if you have the worksheet for the month, it looks a little something like this. Be your own best teammate. Talk to yourself in big moments the way you would a teammate in order to best prepare yourself to succeed. So as I go through this, feel free to pause to work on the sheet, but basically, I want you to think about some phrases that you would say to a teammate who seems to be struggling. You could think of maybe a specific time that you know a teammate that was struggling, or kind of just make it up in your head. If you see a teammate struggling, what would you say to them to make them feel supported and helpful and make them feel confident to keep playing really well? Make sure these are positive, realistic, simple, and specific. And I know it seems like kind of a lot of rules for self talk, so I've included some examples. Stuff like you got the next pass, shoulders down, feet to the ball. Those are more so things you probably say to yourself and not a teammate, but those are really good self talk because you're telling yourselves really simple cues, really specific things that can help you play better. Another example, high hand, hit hard. Something you could say to a teammate, you're playing well, keep it up. Um, you are strong, over impress is something you can say to yourself, or square up, finish strong. So I know a lot of them you might say, well, I'm not going to say that to a teammate. Maybe a coach would say that. That's totally fine. I would say jot those down anyways, and then maybe pick two or three out of all those ones that you wrote down. Could be from my examples, could be from your own, that you can write down on that bottom half of the sheet. And what's important is that I want you to keep the sheet and really look at it often. Going into practice, kind of remind yourself, if I get stuck today, this is something I can say to myself to keep my confidence high. You got the next pass. You're playing well. Keep it up. Square up, finish strong. Whatever it is that works for you. I don't want to be the one that tells you what's right, because everyone's different. So think about either from my list or stuff that you've thought about that you could say to a teammate that you would in turn also say to yourself, that's really going to be helpful and supportive and positive. So feel free to pause and finish the sheet, and then we'll move on to the next. So sort of the next step, like I said, keep your self-talk sheet and read through it before practice. I think that that's really important to kind of remind yourselves of the things that you should be saying to yourself. I think it's hard sometimes if we're struggling to remind ourselves of ways to stay positive. Number two, utilize self talk at practice to figure out which phrases help you the most. Maybe you wrote down some phrases, and then you try them out at practice and you think, well, it's not really helping me. And you try it again and you're like, it's just not helping me. It's making me feel worse, or it's not making me feel better. Start from scratch. Go back to square one, and think of some new phrases that might help you. And then finally, once you've practiced this, bring them into gameplay at tournaments. This is a big month. I know for our team, we have a couple tournaments in the month of March. Big qualifiers start in March. It's a really great time to start working on what we say to ourselves in these big moments that can really help us be better players. As always, if you have any questions, pull me aside at the Sting Center. Give me a call, shoot me an email, whatever works. I want to say also good luck to all the teams this month. And as always, go Sting.